Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Eric Flack, chief investigative reporter, WUSA 9, did some investigating, and it turns out perhaps the District of Columbia, if they want the Commanders to return to RFK, is going to have to get one of those emails from their credit card company. It's like, hey, you have a new credit limit. Eric, that's the extremely oversimplified and silly version of what you and your team have found over there at WUSA 9 when it comes to the future Commanders Stadium. Let's dive in a little bit deeper. Like, if that's the very simplified headline, is there more depth to it, or is there like a cold hard reality that the district can't afford this stadium unless Josh Harris and his people fund it all?
No, the nuance is that the city is going to have to kind of create a different revenue source if they're going to chip in on this stadium, a different revenue source than they have right now. The way it works is, the simplified version is, there's a limit to how much borrowing the DC government can do, which is tied to the overall size of the budget. Right now, they are right up against the top of that limit, now that they just gave $520 million to Ted Leonsis for the Capital One renovation. So they claim and say things could and change in the future, but they haven't explained how it would change, because these limits are created by law. So, like, to your point, get a new credit card, go above the limit, you would have to get DC council to approve that, because this is like a statute. You can have this percentage of the overall expenditures can equal the amount of debt you take out. So they would have to change the law. And even if they did, I asked the chief financial officer if that's a possibility, and that would hurt their credit rating, because then they would start having so much debt that their credit rating would be bad. So the mayor continues to say we can pay for both. The data says she is out of money unless they change something. They cannot shift money away from different projects to make room. This is money that's already committed over the next 6 years. So you would conceivably have to do like a new tax or something like that to literally create a new funding source to kind of chip in on this stadium. Now, they did something similar with Nats Park, where some of that money came from like a business tax, and conceivably that could be one of the options. There's something known as a tax increment financing, where you just create a district around RFK, and as business booms, presumably, then that money goes to the stadium. The problem with that is I still don't understand how that would not count against their debt limit, and the city can't explain why it wouldn't. And two, sometimes those have been unsuccessful. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. DC, Nats Park, that's been a huge success, and they have gotten the money out of it that they expected there. So I guess they could do something like that, but on the surface, it would appear that the city does not have a lot of money to give Josh Harris for a stadium.
So, well, there's a couple of good news items I would say in response to that. One, Josh Harris and his limited partners have a lot of money, so they don't need it. Obviously, the biggest part of this is getting the land in the first place. The funding can be figured out later. We can circle back on that. One of the questions on the financing I have, though, Eric, is timelines here, because in talking to folks, as I know you have as well, but in talking to folks involved over in Ashburn or wherever the hell the business offices are these days, College Park, they understand that this stadium would not open till probably 2030, 2031. When we talk about the construction timeline here, you do have to pay for stuff ahead of time. That's how construction works. But the monumental project is theoretically done in 2028. Is there potentially like, hey, we're going to pay that off in X time, and then we can start paying then? Or is there still too much money already allocated that even starting in 2029, they don't have the money to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the city about that. They're going to be paying off the $520 million for Capital One for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
So the amount of money, because it's like you or me, if we take out loans to buy a house, if you put money on a credit card, there's interest on that. You don't
Right.
just have to pay back the 520 million. So the debt service that is part of the deal that they are obligated to pay back over the next budget cycle, like say through 2030, what you're talking about, that's only going to take care of like it doesn't pay for all of it. It ends up being, it goes well into the future. So that's going to be on the books for a while. The other piece of it is, yeah, I mean, it's going to open in 2030, but they got to ink a deal and come up with the money now. Like they're now, you can't give it in chunks. Like, DC is giving Ted whatever 174.5 mil per year for the next 3 years. So conceivably you could split it up a little bit, but again, you're talking about football stadiums, which are so much more expensive than basketball arenas. I think Jacksonville, like just last week, announced a deal for 900 million for renovations, taxpayer money, and the project's like 1.2 billion, something like that. Chicago just rolled out a plan, and I'm these are off the top of my head, but that one's about 900 million. Um, in taxpayer money. Tennessee is giving 1.2 billion. So like, other than Stan Kroenke and SoFi Stadium in California, there's really no precedent, and I don't think Josh Harris is going to build a stadium all strictly privately financed. We actually asked him about that because he is trying to do that in Philadelphia with a new basketball arena, no taxpayer money, and his response was, football stadiums are more expensive than basketball stadiums. And I think that's kind of the issue, is that he might be able to privately finance it for a basketball arena, but you're not going to privately finance, even he's not rich enough, and his partners would not appear to be rich enough to finance an entire football stadium.
Well, that's one thing I actually wonder about. Eric Flack, WUSA 9, is our guest. So like, there's super minority investors like the Chilean family who's worth like $50 billion or something ridiculous. But they only own whatever percent of the team. And I'm curious, I don't know if you have any idea on this, but like, could another owner who has a very small percentage of the team finance a much more significant percentage of the stadium and own that versus, Harris being the majority owner of the team itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to, I mean, obviously it's all who controls. I mean, all of these people, if I'm, this wildly successful business person, and I'm gonna want to finance a stadium for my football team, even if I only own like 5% of the team, if you're going to put in all your own money to build the whole stadium, you're going to want an adjusted share. I don't think it's going to be, they're going to have business interests. Like, why am I going to fund a stadium for the whole when you, Josh Harris, own the majority?
You get to have all the
team.
fun as the lead guy doing the team stuff.
You get, and you get he gets the revenues. I mean, he gets the majority of the revenues too. I mean, it's tied to, it's tied to how much you make out of the team is tied to how much of the team you own. So, but again, Harris has been on the record saying we're going to be looking for some money. Could that change? Sure, but I think it's much more likely that DC, once they get the land back, is going to have to figure out how they're going to come up with a whole bunch of money, hundreds of millions at the least, 700, 800 million at least, when on paper they are tapped out, totally tapped out.
So assuming that this Steve Daines thing turns out to be something that can be fairly easily appeased, because on some level, like even benevolent reading of it, like there's a political stuntness to it. Like he's trying to make a point, whether that is, being done true to his job or whether he is doing that to score cheap political points. I'll let other people debate that. But ultimately, like, it seems like the kind of thing that can be appeased. So then, assuming that it gets to eventually whatever vote it's going to get to, do you think they need to have the funding mechanism figured out first before Congress releases the land?
No.
Or is that the kind of thing that they'll be like, y'all figure that out later, but here it's yours to figure out?
Yeah, no, I think they're two different things. I think they get the land back by the end of the budget cycle. I mean, by the end of the session, which they've got a couple more months, but they got to get it done this summer or else we start all over again. So, but I predict they're going to get it done in the Senate. This Daines thing is going to be worked out somehow. And then that's when I think Josh Harris and his team meaningfully start negotiating with Virginia, DC, and Maryland. And if that means they go to DC first because that's the preference and say, what can you guys do? And if they don't like what they hear, then they go to Virginia or Maryland, whichever they prefer, whichever is their second favorite. Or if they actually get deals in place with all three and then decide, that is remains to be seen. But I mean, I do think they're going to have to make a decision like this fall. And I think they are waiting for this DC land thing to get worked out so that then they can meaningfully say, okay, what can you guys chip in? How are you going to pay for it? And do we want to move forward, or do we want to look at like Maryland or Virginia?
Do you, like, when you've talked to folks, maybe not involved, but like experts, whatever, economists, people, like, do they see a path that DC can overcome this, that on paper right now they're tapped? Or does it seem like a political pipe dream essentially for Mayor Bowser, who just keeps saying like, we'll make it happen?
I think I get the sense that they are meaningfully invested in Washington, D.C. and bringing the stadium back to the RFK site. How much they have been made aware of the fact that the way the laws work, DC's kind of out of money. Maybe they read our report. I'm not sure, I mean, but, I think that they are taking it one step at a time. Let's get the land back. Check. Okay. What can you guys afford? What can you do creatively to make this happen? The mayor says she can pay for it. She just hasn't explained how.
Last couple of things for Eric Flack here. How much different would this process be if DC was a state versus the kind of way that it has to operate as the unique municipality that it is? Like, is this just the same, but instead of it being governor, whoever in Maryland or Virginia, it's just Mayor Bowser and then a city council versus a state senate? Or are we talking about just like DC having to tackle this in a way that no other entity does because it's DC?
No. In fact, this story idea kind of came from I'll say a source who's interested in one of the other two sites. And we were talking, and he's like, why don't you go ask them how they're going to pay for this thing? And I was like, well, they'll just take out more debt. And he's like, after what they gave to Capital One, there's supposed to be written somewhere what their limit is, and you can find that out. So, I think all municipalities kind of work the same way in that you can't just take out a ridiculous amount of debt. We know in Virginia, though, that they were going to give $1 billion through a stadium authority. And I think the only difference is that like states are going to be a lot bigger and have like access to more money than like a small like municipality that's already like kind of been crushed post-pandemic. I mean, Maryland stadium money comes from the lottery. I mean, they have it all set up perfectly. They sell a bunch of lottery tickets. All that money goes to stadiums, to the stadium authority, and they're good. Virginia was going to create a stadium authority that allowed the state to use its credit to take out $1 billion in bonds, but they got the credit to do so. DC right now can't take out $1 billion in bonds. Like literally, the bank will turn them down, even if it were legal, which it is not, based on their guidelines.
Yeah. So I guess that last question then is, does like the sports gambling thing, I think, is starting to turn in DC. If I'm remembering, there's some like recent stories with like Gambit DC. They finally decide like this was a bad idea, and perhaps they'll open it up and there could be other players in that marketplace over the next 5 years. Could that be a way through here.
I absolutely. I mean, they and the numbers already show that the FanDuel app is already bringing in like millions more per month than that Gambit disaster ever did. So it is like the FanDuel app is actually a good. I was using it over the weekend. It's good and so much better than Gambit. So, but yes, finding new revenue sources would be a way to get around this. Casinos, I'm just spitballing here, but
Yeah.
those are ways that you create huge revenue and projected revenue to pay for something that you can then say, okay, our total expenditures, our total pie is bigger because we have these new revenue sources. And as a result, we can now take out these bonds on the front side because that percentage I was talking about that they're that the law says they can't go beyond, that goes the ceiling goes up, but they have to figure out a revenue source to make the ceiling go up.
Right. How'd you do on FanDuel this weekend?
I had Bryson to come back and win, so I was happy for Xander when he sunk that putt, but it cost me some money. But I had the Knicks. I had Jalen under and Tyrese over in a like small parlay. That did well. So
yeah. Well, the Knicks didn't do well. Neither did Jalen by the end because their injuries, man, it's wild.
Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. I feel bad.
That's something I want to investigate. I want a causation correlation line between the minutes that Tibbs plays his guys over the course of the season and like 40 plus at a time during the playoffs and the injuries. That's what I want, chief investigative reporter, man.
I think we need to get off Tibbs back on that, man. These guys are making zillions of dollars. They can play.
They're still humans. Their bodies don't care. I mean, they care a little bit because they can buy very good training, but there's still limits. They're still humans. And eventually they crack. And in Jalen's case, it was his hand, literally. Eric Flack. All right, that was kind of crude. I apologize to Jalen Brunson. Eric Flack with us here on the Hoffman Show. More on this tonight, WUSA 9, all across the television.
Always. We're going to stay on this one because there's still a lot unanswered.
Yeah, no doubt. And if you want the full report, check out WUSA 9's website. Eric, thank you, sir.
See ya.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.